I would like to emphasize that some of the things that were kind of ad-libbed, and you may have wondered if those were the true types of things that you hear or see at the panels. That is true. Those you're in a room for a number of days, from very early to very late. It does get to have sort of a cloistered feel to it. You know, you're not sending out like gray puffs of smoke for the Pope kind of thing. But I think there's some degree of, I'm going to defer to you. I'm going to trust your decision because I had 25 of these to read in a reasonably short period of time. Also, just some general observations. You may have noted some dominant voices that then could sway people to continue to talk about one aspect of a study or the other. Mm-hmm. So we would like to open it up to questions for you all. Again, thank you. I know sometimes people have other things that they're kind of coming and going to, but let's open it up to some questions.
Interjection.
Yes,
I'm going
please.
to pass around one more time some sign-up sheets, so if you hadn't signed in, if we could ask you to do so while we have our Q&A. I'm also going to start passing around cookies.
That's the way to get the meeting.
Julie has a question.
All right, great. Thank you.
So my question, this is actually regarding the makeup of the panel. I was looking at the reviewer names and that sort of thing. So when I have applied before, you have the different topics under special education, right? Is the panel topic specific, or is it just, because it just says special ed? But so then it's broken into topics. So there's somewhat expertise under each topic for the most part. I was seeing yeses and maybes.
So let me give you a brief answer, and then you guys add in. I'm going to go sit down. Probably the only answer I'll know all day. The special ed panel is fairly mixed. Assessment folks, the letters of intent that come in help them to formulate the panel, but you might have people that are part of the deaf ed community, part of hearing impairment, just a wide variety on that special ed panel in particular. And then you have those others, social, emotional, behavioral, et cetera, that are more tightly specific. But I'll let you guys also add your feedback, and I'm going to go sit down with my cookie.
So I don't know. I've only been on 2 panels, so I don't know if Jenny and Liz, if you have more, or Esther. Okay.
Yeah, they usually have maybe 2 or 3 special education panels over the week, and but that doesn't mean that all the special ed research projects will be read in that panel, those panels. For a variety of reasons, because the topics within special ed may connect with some of the other topics. Like a lot of the time, I think some of my early IES ones were probably sent to the social behavioral panel, which has some special ed people, but it's more gen ed school psych kind of people, really.
Yeah.
Yeah, I sat once
developmental psych, actually. There's a lot of developmental psych people on social behavioral.
Yeah. And I sat once on the, the one that has like reviews early career research and postdoc training and so on for special ed. There's a research methods one.
Mm-hmm. So it just depends, but I would say as a reviewer, when I'm reviewing, when I get the proposals I'm assigned, if there is something that is, if I'm a good reviewer and look at the list of proposals I've been assigned very early on, then I have the opportunity to say that, some of these are outside of my expertise, that I'm really not able to adequately review it. And then they will, I assume what IES does is identify ad hoc panel review members who have that expertise. I don't know if they do it for one proposal or a certain number, but I think that if enough people indicate they don't have the expertise to review these kind of proposals, and they seek out ad hoc members to do that, if that helps. I don't know if that's what you're kind of getting towards.
Yeah, no, that's helpful. And my follow-up question is, when you're reviewing, are you reviewing across all the goals in a single review time?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And going back to that, I mean, the variety of proposals coming in are so broad that it's very difficult to get panels that would actually have expertise in all those specific areas. So I have found that in the review panels that I've served, that there are quite a few generalists who are not necessarily experts in that area.
one of the things is IES usually puts one or usually two methodologists on every panel. And without fail, they talk about power analysis. Like IES is obsessed with power analysis. So just be sure you have power analysis in your proposals, IES, because the methodologists will always talk about that.
And the latest little extension to the power analysis is not only doing your regular power analysis for your primary confirmatory questions, but also for your mediation and moderator analysis. So.
But I think the take home is that you have to write broad enough so that people who are not experts in your field can grasp it, but also demonstrate that you have enough expertise that you know what you're talking about, right? So you're writing for two different audiences. You're writing for generalists, or as I say, someone like me who knows enough to be dangerous, right? Like, so I never know enough about reading to be dangerous, but I'm not technically an expert in that area. So when you start getting to the nitty gritty and using acronyms, you lose me, right? And so it's finding that balance. I don't know if you all agree. And I think that's true for all kind of funding agencies, is trying to figure out the balance in your audience.
Yeah, for sure.
I have a couple questions. How do you join a panel? Are there any prerequisites? And do you have any advice to would-be potential panelists in terms of how to get there or things to keep in mind?
Wait, I think you could just email the IES staff and just say you'd like to volunteer for a panel. They would probably love it, because they're having a hard time staffing panels. So yeah, I think the trick with IES is it's hard to find staff on the website. They're very secretive about their staff, and unlike NIH, which lists all the panel members on every single panel, like the standard one, and who was actually in the room for any given set of reviews, IES does not release who's on their panel. So like you can't really tell if there's somebody who has your expertise or not on a panel. So I would just try to find a staff member's email and just email them. Do it after the fact.
It's usually by invitation, but I have a colleague actually who's emailed the program officer every year for a number of years asking to be on the panel, and she has not been put on the panel. So I don't know what their magic criteria is, because she's pretty well funded, not by them specifically, but there are other folks on the review panels who have not received IS funding. So I don't, but everyone else I know has been by invitation, and often they tap you once you've gotten an IES grant. Yeah. Not always, but often.
Yeah, I would say it's by invitation and nomination, right? So some people will say you should think about, putting this person up. Now, I don't know how staffers use that, and I don't know the exact process, but I do know for other funding agencies, though, it is a little bit easier. Like OJJDP will. Do you want
to say what that is? Because not everybody knows what that is.
I don't even know what it is. Office of
Juvenile Justice
Office of
Prevention.
Yep, that's it. I always get stuck on 1J where I'm like, no. So I would say that the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention, you could put your name up there, and I also think that once you, some of it also too is like, are you known in an area of expertise, right? So if you're known in this area, right, and these are proposals that come up, and usually what happens is you're invited as an ad hoc review member, so they're just kind of trying you out to see, I think, if you're going to do what you say you're going to do and be timely and develop appropriate reviews that are consistent with their procedures. And then after that, if it's successful and they have space, they may invite you to actually be a panel member. And I don't know if NIH and NSF are like that as well, but usually it's an ad hoc position.
I'll actually add something I just remembered. IES contracts out their whole review process, so it's not the PO who is selecting the reviewers. And so there's a totally different set of folks who are emailing us, inviting us to sit on it, I think evaluating us. We have a 1-year trial before we serve our 3-year term. And so that's probably the disconnect between the program officer and the panel.
And just a quick follow-up, what are the benefits to you as individuals for participating on such panels?
That's a good question.
Wow, they're amazing.
They pay us so well. They pay all right.
Actually,
IES pays better than others.
Well, you learn what not to do.
Yeah, you learn what other reviewers get hung up on. like power analysis. Like I never thought that was that big of a deal, but there are people who get hung up on power analysis. And so you kind of learn what hangs up certain people. And I just finished teaching a grant writing class for doctoral students. And like the theme of my class was do not annoy the reviewers.
Yeah.
Yes.
Because little things will
Yes.
drive reviewers
Yes.
bonkers, like
Small font size.
small font, everything crammed on a page, and having too many acronyms, and not having the right citations that are like citing something but not having in the references section, and like just little things like that also drive us crazy when we're grading papers from grad students. If you do that in your proposals, it just can. Like I've heard reviewers say, well, if they're going to make these kind of errors, then how can we trust them with this big project? Yeah. And so those kind of things, you don't realize that comes up actually in discussions, but it does. And that has been very eye-opening for me, for sure.
So I just think seeing a variety of proposals and the way that people construct the proposal, I think so. When I was kind of being mentored, like I was taught things like, so when you're writing a grant, you think, I gotta get all this information. I gotta tell them every single thing I know, right? So you're just trying to cram in as much as you can into this narrative. And I was told by a mentor, like, you need some white space. You need to calm down. This sentence is 3 lines. Like nobody's gonna read it one sentence that is like a paragraph. And I was like, oh, right? And so I think seeing the variety of proposals, and I think also being in the process of the conversation, and some people are petty. Let's just call it what it is. There are some people who are very petty. There are some people who have agendas. There are some people who know enough to be dangerous. But there are also people who are very thoughtful and have comments that can really improve and really expand your thinking. So they're asking questions and they're offering feedback that makes me reconsider not only how I'm looking at this proposal, but my own work. So I think there's that opportunity because it's really interdisciplinary, even though it's for education. So you're exposed to people who have different expertise and do different types of designs. So I think that is really helpful to me.
So I think another advantage or benefit of serving on grant panels is that you actually get to meet and network with a lot of great researchers in your areas or fields. So you don't do it just for that, but that's a side benefit. And after you serve on panels for a while, you kind of, when you start to write your own proposals, for me, I actually start hearing, like when I'm writing, I can actually hear people saying comments, not like I'm going, but you actually know the pitfalls to avoid. You really know, what will trigger some people, and you know how to word or avoid certain pitfalls. And I think that's very valuable.
Yeah, all of that. One of the main reasons is to improve my own grant writing and being able to be in the room where it happens and networking with all these people. But getting to kind of have your finger on the pulse of what's going on in the nation, research-wise. We get to hear from the top leaders in our educational agencies. It's a cool experience to be a part of.
I'll just add too that it's highly valued at the PT, at the promotion and tenure, at the tower level, at least for us, and I imagine, across universities, that it's
that's where our
the kind of
administration is
service.
In the tower. So we always talk about the tower.
The tower.
The powers that be live in the tower.
Powers are in the tower. Yeah, so it's kind of the ultimate service in terms of like national recognition, and so strategically, it's good from that perspective.
So I do want to add the strategic part because this does take a significant amount of time. So like I got my review. So every time I agree to do this, like I agree in like October, I'm like, yeah, totally, I will do this. I'll review this panel. And then like December 10th comes, I'm like, because
this is due December 26th.
Yeah. This is due January 7th, and I'm like, when am I gonna? So it's a lot of time, and so it is rewarding, but I would encourage you to be strategic about, depending where you are in your career, right, and how successful or not successful you've been, about when is the appropriate time to do this. And I don't have a straightforward answer to that because just like it takes a significant amount of time to write a grant, it takes a significant amount of time to review these proposals, so that I think about it as taking time from something else, right? And so you have to figure out, I think most of us are mid-career or full professors. I don't know if any of us were assistants on panels. So that tells you something about what time we can give up to do this. And it's an important service, has high recognition. You learn a lot, don't get me wrong, but I don't know how much time you spend reviewing, but
A lot.
it's more than I think every year. I'm like, oh yeah, I'll get it done, in a week. And I don't. I look at Jeff and panic, and I'm like, I'm not gonna make it. So
it is really intense, and honestly, especially early on, I think for me with the NIH review panel, it takes you like good, I want to say a couple of days to recover fully from after reviewing on the panel, because it really is exhausting, mentally exhausting, before and right after the panel.
Yeah, so just to give you guys a little bit of sense of, you didn't ask this question, but to describe what the event is like. So you show up, there's a breakfast meeting, usually like 8:30 or something, and then 9 o'clock you go to your room to start the reviews. You review, typically, you're trying to review 20 minutes or less per proposal, and that includes the time for the scoring and everything. So the discussion is only like 10 or 15 minutes, really, the actual discussion. You do that, you get a little coffee break in the middle if you're lucky, you get a lunch break, and then it usually goes till like 6 o'clock at night. And then you like go to your room and fall down on the bed and maybe get room service, and then you come back again, usually at 8 a.m. the next day, and go till like 12 or 1. And so usually the panels that I did were usually about 24, 25 proposals in that amount of time. So you are just really booking it. And so people are exhausted. So that's another thing that's really valuable is I always tell my students, like, think about the reviewers. You could be the last one. They are exhausted. They've already discussed 23 proposals. They're
hungover.
Yeah, they're hungover. Who knows? So you have to think about their state of mind, and if they see a page full of text with no breaks, that is just going to demoralize them. They're not going to want to read it, and it's going to be hard for them to discuss. And so partly because of that, because it takes, I spend hours and hours on each one when I'm one of the main reviewers.
Yes.
And because of that, I don't read all of the proposals anymore. The first time I did, and then I realized nobody else is doing that, because nobody can read 24 proposals. Well, I did the first time, and I was like, how does everybody do this? Yeah. They're not doing it. Most people show up, they've reviewed, I don't know, maybe 8 proposals, and written a review. For the rest of them, they're showing up. They may have skimmed a few that are interesting to them or that are in their kind of wheelhouse. But otherwise, what happens is the main reviewers are talking, and then everyone else is reading it while it's going on, which is why I tell everybody the most important part of your whole proposal is what they call at NIH, the specific aims page, because that's usually the page everybody is reading while the discussion is going on. And any figures you have, like any kind of, logic models, those are super valuable because the rest of the panelists are trying to get up to speed really fast. They're listening out of one ear to the discussion, but they're also kind of trying to read it really fast. So that is kind of eye-opening, I think, when I first went to reviews, like, oh, so and those people get to score it. Yeah. They're scoring, not just the 3 people that read it really carefully. Everybody scores it. So you have to, your main job, I always tell people, is to convince reviewer 1. You need reviewer 1 to be your advocate. Because if they don't love your proposal, you're done. Because they set the tone, as you saw, they kind of describe it. If they don't understand the proposal, or if they misunderstand it, then you're done for. But they have to be passionate because they've got to get the rest of these tired reviewers to get passionate also. And they also have to defend you if somebody has a question. And so the best proposals are the ones where the reviewer 1 is like, this is a fantastic proposal, we have to fund it, and let me tell you why. And that happens. That really does happen for good proposals. And so I have reviewer 1 in my head, but that's who I'm writing for. I'm writing for reviewer 1. But just to give you a sense of what the actual review is like, it's not, most people are uninformed when they're voting on your proposal.
So I want to add something so this is only proposals that make it to panel.
Oh, right.
And there's a lot of proposals that don't even get to this point where they get scored. And I've received those. And so the feedback for that is usually you're just getting the reviewer's feedback and not individual summaries. And so if you are at that stage, one thing you might think about doing is reaching, and program officers differ at IES with their, so they're not going to give you kind of directions, but reaching out to the program officer, and people would tell me, like, just reach out to the program officer and ask them, but they would never tell me what questions to ask. So I would ask questions, the program, I can't answer that. And I'm like, what can you answer? Like, it was kind of like a game, like, well, can you answer this? And so, so then I would ask questions like, I didn't make it to panel. What is the likelihood, do you think this is worth resubmitting? Like, and they're not going to give you details like, yeah, you were just below the threshold because they can't tell you that. But I've heard other people have different relationships with program officers where they'll say, my program officer is very non-committal. So she's like, yeah, submit, bet it all, bet the house. And I'm like, all right, and then I submit, and she's like, yeah, submit, bet that. I'm like, okay, how many times are we going to do this? But other of my colleagues have had program officers that would say, you know what, honestly, I think the panel is trying to tell you something. It's up to you whether you want to kind of put forth this energy. I don't know. But I think you need to have an understanding that a lot of times people don't make it to the panel. And if you do make it to the panel, Kay was talking about this, a lot of people are not funded their first time. So there's a difference between not getting on panel, right? That's a different pool versus making it to panel and not meeting this threshold and resubmitting because your chances probably are higher that you'll get funded the next time versus when you don't make it to panel. That doesn't mean you should give up. It just means that you should reach out to your program officer, right? And I would argue you want the program officer to at least know you. They don't really participate in the review process, so they don't become your advocates, but I think my program officer, I can tell what the pulse is because sometimes she's really excited about ideas. It's just the year that I don't have access to schools, but whatever. And sometimes she's like, yeah, submit. You know what I mean? Like, and that's how she's always like, submit. I don't know if she gets like points or something for the more proposal. But
actually they do, in the sense that the program officer job is to drum up support for the program. Right. And how do you do that best? By getting as many applications as you can. And so I've never had a program officer say that's a bad idea. But on the other hand, I'm always very strategic in how I approach the program officer. Most of them are willing to read your proposals, so I will attempt to get at least the bones of the proposal ready and send it to them and ask them whether it's a realistic proposal. And in those kinds of cases, they can give you constructive feedback on places to improve and places to make changes. And that's a much better way of approaching the program officer, because I can guarantee you that if I'm in the business of getting more business for my business, if you come to me and say, you know what, should I do this? I'm going to say, of course, yes. So I think program officers by nature are designed to bring more prestige and more applications to their program. So they're not going to say no to you. But on the other hand, if you are strategic in preparing the proposal ahead of time, sharing it with them, asking them for constructive feedback on specific areas, is my significant section significant enough? Is my research methodology appropriate for this panel? You ask very specific questions and they will be forced to give you specific answers. And doesn't mean that just because they like your proposal, you're going to get funded, but at least they're going to give you constructive feedback with all the background knowledge that they have from having sat in those review panels. So they know a little bit more about it, and that's the way I've operated.
Can I just add that, consistent with that, the program officers at IES specifically seem to have much more latitude to communicate with you before you've submitted than after. They seem to have some kind of code of silence, once you've submitted. And so my program officer got on the phone with me and was like, I like your idea, but you're telling the story the wrong way. Do it this way. And I mean, they will give you that strategic kind of thinking and insight that they can only do at the very beginning of the process. And so reach out. But once you've submitted, they seem to be kind of like
Yeah, and don't wait till a week before it's due. I mean, please don't. I mean, you can imagine if you're the person on the receiving end of that, right? I mean, who's going to read all of that, 25 pages, plus all the appendices? They're not going to. But if you give them about 3 to 4 weeks, you're golden. I mean, they will actually give you feedback. And I suggest you take them up on it.
That's unusual to IES, and NIH does not do that. The program officers will not look at proposals. They won't even look at it. You're lucky if they look at an Ames page, but that's about it. They would never look at a whole proposal. Right.
And just to add, I think something that I learned is so, and the panel may disagree with me, but other people are working on, so this is the one gamble about IES, right? You don't know what goals are going to be funded. So sometimes there's been a time where they weren't funding any goal 2 applications, right? Or they were funding, or they're not funding any goal 5, any measurement applications, right?
Special ed research.
Or special ed research. So that is a gamble. But what I have learned and observed is that when I was assistant professor, I'm like, oh, the call came out. Let me work on my application right now. But people have been working on their proposals for months. It's not to discourage you. It's just to say that, some people, they already kind of have this kind of planned out. And so this idea of, so if I would have heard what Kay's saying, like as an assistant, I'd be like, what do you mean? I'm thinking of it right now. There's no way I'm going to have the bare bones to give this to her, my program officer, a month ahead of time, because I was responding just to when the RFA was released. But I would encourage you to think about, if you have an idea, even if you have to put it on the shelf, to start developing those proposals well in advance of when I would argue the same thing's true for NIH and NSF, unless you're applying for kind of a specific RFA that has a specific area that just comes up. But for these standing kind of proposals or RFAs, you need to be thinking about that well in advance and kind of crafting it so you're not kind of hit. And I don't know if other people agree with that, but that was just my experience, that I was thinking of the idea and trying to write it at the same time, and there was no way I could get anything of substance to a...
And just along those lines, the good news is if you invest your time correctly, you will get prepared for a long-term, very successful career in grant writing, okay? But you have to invest that time up front. That means getting to know what they're already funding. Go through all their funded proposals, take a look and see what they've funded in the last 5 years. Read the abstracts, contact the people, and ask them for their proposals. Most of them won't send it to you, but maybe 1 or 2 will, okay? Number 2, when you do look at these things, don't think short term. I mean, prepare yourself to think along, okay, this is a very urgent problem facing our country. How should we address this? Can I talk to other researchers who are doing similar work in that area? And get to know these people, put together a team that's a winning combination, and then go after these proposals. So it may not happen in 1 year, but in 2 to 3 to 4 years, you will. And I can tell you, one of the best ways that I got into the business was partnering with the right people. Partnering with the right people cannot be neglected. That is the way to get into this business. And just for your information, there is a conference called the Society for Research in Educational Effectiveness. The organization is called SRI. It was founded by IES with Larry Hedges as the head of the group. They have a conference every year in Washington, D.C. That's where just about everybody that gets IES funding goes and presents. So if you haven't had an opportunity to go to that, you really should, because you will see the kind of work that's happening. Don't go to AERA. If you have the money, go to the SRI conference. Every year, March 1st week, Friday to Sunday, it is the best investment of your time to see what has been funded and what has been successful. And you can then approach people at that conference and say, could I work with you? Could I do some parts of this? Would you be willing to review my proposal? Go out there and ask. I mean, what's the worst that can happen? They'll say no. But in the ideal case, they might say, sure, why not?
We're hearing some really great advice here. I just wanted to take a short break to see if we have other questions from the audience.
I heard during the mock review, somebody, it was the chair, she said it's not a resubmission and acknowledged that for both of them. So I'm just curious, how are they treated differently if they are resubmissions?
So a resubmission comes with the last round of reviews with it. So the reviewers, when we get the packet, the last round of reviews is there. And from the 3 main reviewers, and if it was discussed, you get the summary statement that the synthesis that was kind of written. So what would happen is the proposal, they get 1 page to respond to reviewers to explain kind of how, like when you do a manuscript review, but it's only 1 page. And that's true across agencies. You get basically 1 page to do that. And so we would have that as reviewers. And then when we do our review, we can say if they were responsive to the reviews or not, even if we weren't one of the original reviewers. Because sometimes, because you can't tell, sometimes you can read your writing and go, oh, I must have written that. Or you remember the project, because it's, years can go by in between them. But whether or not it's responsive will come up in the reviews. So it doesn't necessarily mean there's a better chance of funding. I mean, maybe slightly better. We get to see the score, like their average score, so we can see kind of where they were. At IES, there is no limit on submissions. So you can, I think I was at one where it was like the 7th submission, and we were like, come on. Like, I think we just wanted to say, stop submitting. Like, we're not going to fund this. This is a bad idea. Some people just are very persistent. So you can just keep resubmitting as many times as you want at IES. That's not true at NSF or NIH, but at IES, yeah.
Yeah, I would also strongly suggest you not submit it more than 4 times.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
4 is a little...
You're doing something wrong if you have to do... If you haven't got it by the 3rd time, you're doing something wrong.
And I said that at our lunch. I just wanted to... if you get to panel and you get a decent enough score and you get something like a 2.1, 2.4, please just respond to those questions. Don't get any funky ideas that you're going to revamp the whole thing. They've given you a fantastic opportunity. Take it. If you don't, it's your fault.
I think there are questions over there. Love it.
Okay, hello. Noemi from the College of Education. I think I met some of you already. Well, what I've noticed is the roles of the different panelists. I'm familiar with other agencies, but it's pretty much the same standard, right? You have main reviewers, and then you have kind of secondary, and then you have a subscriber, et cetera, et cetera. So in that sense, at the beginning, I was like, okay, this looks familiar, but I don't know if it's kind of the same. The second question, I think that got clarified, right?
Yes.
It's very much across agencies. So the second question has to do with this overlap between agencies. There is overlap, NIH, NSF, DOE, IES. What is the criteria that you use to choose one agency over another when it comes to your work? Of course, in things that overlap.
Yeah, I mean, I could apply to NIH, but for me, honestly, I guess initially it's where I thought my work fit best. And then once you know how to write for a particular agency, it's a lot easier to keep writing for those agencies than new ones.
Yeah, I mean, I have submitted a very similar project to 2 different agencies, to IES and NIH. So we packaged it, and this is totally kosher to do. I mean, we said for NIH, we're going to do this. For IES, we're going to do this. And we submitted them around the same time. And the first time we got like a 2.2. And so that's basically telling us to resubmit. So we did. And then we did not get scored the second time. But it was a project on early childhood education, so we thought IES would be interested. NIH loved it and funded it the first time. Yeah. So I thought for sure IES, and I had been on this early childhood panel for years. I thought, I know how to write the proposals for these people. They did not like it, but NIH did. Now, I couldn't have predicted that NIH would have liked it so much. So, I mean, there is kind of a lot of overlap. there's a lot of difference in what you actually write and how you write it. You know, NIH is much shorter than IES. IES, you get a lot more space because you have 25 single-space pages versus either 6 or 20. Is it 20?
25.
It's 25. That's what I thought, which is what
it's
NIH
20.
used to be. But RO3s are only 6, and then 12 for RO1, and so it's less than half is the amount of space you get at IES. So like if you feel like you need a lot of space to write about it, then IES might be for you. And IES you can have lots of appendices, NIH you cannot. So if you've got material that you think is going to help make your case, then you might want to go to IES because you can show your materials and things like that. And you cannot send any of that to NIH anymore.
That sounds better.
Shorter is, I think, much better. It's easier to write.
Another follow-up. What would you choose IES, DOE for?
What would I choose it for? Well, I mean, things that are very specific about education and improving education. That's what they want to fund. They want to fund things that will help education in all of its forms. And you can do adult education too. I mean, there's adult education proposals. So as long as it's very specifically about my project will help improve education in some way, then you can go to IES.
And I think you should in that case look at what they have been funding because they post that publicly. The abstracts are available on there, and you should get on their listserv that provides new information from Mark Schneider, who's the director of IES, on what they are looking to fund in the upcoming year and so on. So he already sent out 3 or 4 emails about the new funding cycle, and and he's making very specific changes to what they're planning on funding. So it's good to get on their listserv. So.
I wanted to know if how IES particularly treat the early career researchers or first-time submission. If there's any benefit or disadvantage, or do you have any kind of suggestions for those things?
Yeah, there's an early career award that I think you're only eligible for maybe the first 5 years out of a doc program or postdoc. So those are when you can take the chance to apply for them. I sat on the panel only once for the special ed research. It did seem like the people who were more competitive were those who had postdocs where they had a lot of experience writing grants and other kinds of stats and things like that, and they had really strong mentors from both internally and externally.
I'm aware of one person who was very successful in getting that and 2 people who were not, and the one person was purely based on the publication they had and the mentoring. And you have to have a top-tier publication and a superstar mentor in order to get it. The one thing you want to be aware of in those early career grants, they're a small amount of money, but on top of that, they prevent you from applying for any other grants for 3 years if you do get an award. So you are forbidden from applying for any gold grant if you are going for a career grant. So yeah, that I found out because I was listed as a mentor for them. For 3 years, they're not allowed to apply. So if you submit an early career grant, you cannot even be a co-PI on somebody else's other grant.
Or get it funded?
No, just submit it. You can't submit. Yes, you can't submit. Yes.
Oh, I don't know about that.
Anybody else?
Look at the RFA for sure. Read it
Yeah,
carefully.
read it very, very carefully. Yes.
I have a process question based on your discussion of the second proposal. Several of you could not find a personnel section, so there was a very low score there, right? Let's presume that it was actually missing. I mean, one of the reviewers found it, right? But let's say it was actually missing, or there was some other egregious error like that. During your discussion, I heard hints of what I've often heard on other panels. Well, yeah, that's a bad mistake, but this is a very senior person, has written, has done excellent work, and we'll give her a bye. I mean, we know she can do the work. Do you see this happen often?
It's interesting you say that because that has used to happen all the time. But in this last year, for the program officers and somebody at IES went through the proposals, and if you were missing sections, they just outright rejected you. And in the past, I've had a couple of situations where we missed maybe one paragraph on something, and they still took it to panel or something like that. But in the last round, I know we got an outright rejection, even before, within a month of submission, that this proposal was missing the cost analysis plan. That's it. You're out.
Okay.
But you're asking broadly, do people jump to conclusion? Like, do we allow kind of
Do you
biases?
give a bye to the senior PIs that have been successful and made a mistake?
Absolutely.
The panel does, yeah.
Absolutely.
But
There's
they're
a
not
lot of
supposed to.
assumptions
They're
about
not
senior.
But if you're young and novice and you don't know, and you're
Don't
just
make
like,
those mistakes.
and you're just looking at the proposal and you're looking at the criteria, like myself, you're like, they didn't do this, right? Like, or how do you know? But that could be a career killer. So I don't know. Choose your.
Well,
I think I do and I don't. So yeah, to some degree, if they have in their CV, they've been funded by this agency and they've published from it, it's really clear, then sort of. But I've also gotten really terrible applications as a primary reviewer from people who are superstars, and you're like, you had your postdoc write this. So I don't necessarily just, okay, well, they're a great researcher, so I'll just ignore all the missing stuff.
yeah, I think it's human nature to say, well, we know the person can do the work, right, based on their record. And it's a great proposal, except for this. So we'll overlook
It's a little thing.
Well, I am aware of a proposal that was recently reviewed at a different agency at NIH, and it was a multi-institution submission. So one of the subcontracts, I believe that one of the person was a co-PI, but that person's profile, the bio sketch, was missing. And to my recollection, comments were made about that being missing, but it didn't. Not for all the reviewers. I think one of the reviewers rated it low for personnel, but some others kind of still reviewed it. So, if it's missing, it's missing. People can't really evaluate what's not there. So the biosketch is like an important piece. But another important piece at NIH, and maybe for IES you can speak to that, I don't know, but it's the IRB information. People always look at it and they have to comment on it. And if it's not clear, it doesn't necessarily, quote unquote, tank the proposal, but people will have to look into it. Like they'll have to go back and look into it. I mean, if there's like a little bit lack of clarity, but they always ask, like every proposal, IRB is important.
One reason I wanted to ask this question is, I think most junior people know up front that they can't afford to make those kind of mistakes because you don't have the reputation, you don't have a long series of publications yet to give that luster of, oh, well, we know he can do it, right? Even though he made this mistake. So it is really important to cross those T's, dot the I's, and really do put your very best foot forward, especially as a junior investigator or a new investigator to the discipline. Other questions from the audience?
Just a little plug for your office. The CERD has a super team. I know that I work with Jesus Palomo all the time. He comes to the meeting with a checklist of everything that's required for every application. We had a meeting already for a new proposal that's going in. The man is so organized. Please use those kinds of support services, because if you can take care of all of those things, it's really the best way to go.
And as early as possible. That's underline, exclamation point. It's just way too hard to put your best foot forward to get all those parts together if you're scrambling in weeks instead of months that it should be. And yes, our office is here to help you do that to the best of your and our ability. Last chance. All right, so Thank you, everybody, for coming today. We really appreciate the Communications Department help in videographing. And let's thank our panelists one more time, and especially Kimber Van Est for organizing.